Why was everyone laughing before the demonstration had even begun? The morning sun at Silver Creek cast long, deliberate shadows across the firing platforms, a place where reputations were forged in sweat and shattered by a single missed shot. It wasn't just another training ground. It was the proving ground. Every legend in the Marine Corps sniper community had stood here once, staring down the impossible. And now, one young woman stood among them, ignored and underestimated before she'd even lifted a rifle. Cadet Alyssa Trent, 22 years old, 5'7", olive skin, and hazel eyes that saw more than most people realized, stood a half step behind the formation. Her boots were still coated with dust from the brutal pre-dawn ruck march. Her uniform was immaculate. Her posture was perfect. And yet, the men around her saw none of it. "Got ourselves a beauty queen playing soldier today, gentlemen," Staff Sergeant Walsh called out, his voice booming across the range. Laughter followed, low and dismissive, cutting sharper than any insult shouted to her face. Walsh was a Marine's Marine, broad-shouldered, battle-scarred, 20 years in service etched into every line on his weathered face. And right now, he was making sure everyone knew where she stood, beneath them. Alyssa's expression didn't change. It never did, but her grip on the heavy pack tightened slightly. They didn't know her story. They didn't know why she was here, and they certainly didn't know what she was capable of. "Attention on deck!" The barked order rippled through the assembled snipers as Captain Rivera approached, clipboard in hand. His presence silenced the laughter in an instant. 3 combat tour had taught these men respect, if not for their fellow Marines, then for their commanding officer. "At ease," Rivera said, scanning the group. "Welcome to Silver Creek Advanced Marksmanship Training. You're here because your co's believe you have what it takes." His gaze paused on Alyssa for a heartbeat before sliding away. "Some of you anyway." More laughter, a few sidelong glances, and once again Alyssa stood still, her silence saying more than any retort could. "Today," Rivera continued, "we separate the real shooters from the wannabes." He gestured toward the distant horizon. 4,550 meters, that's your target." A low whistle cut the air. Even among these seasoned professionals, that distance was the stuff of legend beyond extreme, deep into the territory where math, physics, and luck fought a brutal, invisible war. "Trent," Walsh barked suddenly. Alyssa stepped forward with crisp precision, stopping exactly 2 paces from him. "Since you're our special guest," Walsh sneered, "you get special duties. Carry the rifles, clean the optics, fetch the ammo. Think you can manage that, princess?" The laughter that followed was crueler this time, more deliberate. Alyssa's voice was steady when she answered. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "You're not here to shoot, you're here to serve those who can." Walsh leaned closer, his voice dropping to a mock whisper that still carried. "This isn't the mall, sweetheart." The men chuckled again as Walsh turned back to the group. "Alpha Team, you're up first. Let's show the cadets how the big boys play." The morning unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. Alpha Team men with rows of ribbons on their chests and more confirmed kills than most Marines would ever see took their positions one by one. Their rifles were works of art, custom-stocked, match-grade, perfectly tuned precision instruments. And yet, shot after shot missed the distant steel. "The wind's shifting in 3 damn directions," Master Sergeant Peterson muttered as he adjusted his scope for the 5th time. Even the most seasoned shooters couldn't conquer the complex wind currents that carved through the canyon. Alyssa moved quietly between them, handing out ammunition, wiping lenses, collecting spent brass. But her eyes were everywhere, tracking how the heat mirage distorted through the spotting scopes, watching the distant flags whip at different altitudes, feeling the subtle temperature shifts that betrayed invisible changes in air density. "To Moa left," she whispered almost to herself as she passed Peterson another magazine. "What was that, Boot?" he asked, looking up sharply. "Nothing, Master Sergeant," she said quickly, "just counting rounds." But Peterson's next shot, after a small adjustment, landed closer than any before. Still a miss, but not by much. By midday, the mood had soured. The impossible distance remained just that, impossible. Even Walsh, who prided himself on being the best, couldn't land a hit. "This," he announced loudly, "is why we don't waste time putting women behind precision rifles. Can't handle the math or the pressure." Alyssa paused only for a heartbeat before continuing her work. But in that fleeting second, Lieutenant Rodriguez, the youngest instructor on site, noticed something in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't humiliation. It was calculation. When the last shot was fired, the radio crackled with the same disappointing verdict. Miss. Walsh slammed his fist against the shooting bench. "Conditions are outside operational parameters," he snapped, a convenient excuse that fooled no one. As the group prepared to return to base, Walsh caught Alyssa still staring at the distant target. "Something interesting out there, cadet?" he asked mockingly. "No, Staff Sergeant." Her eyes never left the horizon. "Maybe you think you could do better." "No, Staff Sergeant." "Then pick up the gear and move out." As she gathered the last of the rifle cases, her notebook slipped from her pocket. Walsh snatched it before she could react. His smirk faltered as he flipped through page after page of meticulous ballistic calculations, wind diagrams, and atmospheric notes. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "Ballistic observation, Staff Sergeant." Walsh tore several pages out and tossed them into the wind. "When I want your opinion on ballistics, I'll ask for it, which will be never." He dropped the notebook at her feet and walked off. Rodriguez stayed behind to help her collect the scattered pages. "That's some detailed work," he said quietly. "Thank you, sir." "Where'd you learn it?" "My father taught me, sir." Rodriguez nodded but said nothing more. Yet as they walked back, he couldn't shake what he'd seen. The equations weren't guesses, they were solutions. And at the bottom of one page, a set of firing calculations unlike anything taught in standard doctrine. That night, Walsh's parting words echoed through the barracks. "Tomorrow, same target. I'll give a month's pay to anyone who can hit it." No one laughed this time, not after a day of humiliating failure. Dawn came cold and merciless. The air bit at exposed skin and breath hung like smoke in the frigid air. Alyssa stood at the end of the formation, nearly invisible, exactly where Walsh wanted her. "Today," he announced, packing before them, "we learn the heart of precision shooting. It's not about fancy gear or textbook knowledge. It's about mastery under pressure." The legendary target loomed on the horizon, taunting them. No one had ever hit it consistently. Not here. Not at Silver Creek. "Trent," Walsh barked. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Equipment duty again. Think you can handle that? Or should I find someone with more upper body strength?" Laughter rippled through the group. Alyssa didn't react. "I can handle it, Staff Sergeant." "Outstanding. Alpha Team wants their rifles cleaned and ready by 800. Move." She double-timed it to the equipment shed. Alone among racks of rifles, she allowed herself one quiet breath. Then she got to work breaking down each weapon with practiced efficiency, checking every component with a care few instructors bothered with. When Rodriguez entered 20 minutes later, he stopped in the doorway. "That's not standard procedure," he observed. "Sir, the way you're inspecting the barrel crown, that's competition level." "My father was particular about maintenance," she replied simply. Rodriguez watched her for a moment longer, then said quietly, "I pulled your file last night. It was rejected twice before suddenly being approved 3 weeks ago. Curious timing." "I improved my qualifications, sir." "Your scores were already in the top percentile, and your father's name redacted. That's unusual." Alyssa said nothing. "Walsh is an ass," Rodriguez continued. "But he's not stupid. You're a threat and he knows it." "With respect, sir, I'm just here to learn." "Sure you are." Rodriguez's eyes lingered on the worn silver dollar she kept turning over in her pocket, a keepsake from a father whose legacy was clearly much larger than her record revealed. By 0730, the rifles were spotless and laid out with surgical precision. Alpha Team swept in, barely acknowledging her. "At least the princess can clean a weapon," Walsh muttered as he passed. "Carry the ammo crates." The weight was punishing. Trip after trip, Alyssa hauled heavy boxes while others received instruction. It was deliberate, a slow grind meant to break her spirit. And yet she endured. "They're trying to break you," a voice said quietly as she paused at the water station. Cadet Thompson, a former ranger, stood beside her. "Is it working?" she asked dryly. "Not even close, but Walsh isn't used to people who don't crack." "I'm not here to impress him." "Then why are you here?" Before she could answer, Walsh's bark cut through the air. "Trent, ammo to position 3. The day wore on. Alyssa carried, cleaned, observed. Every movement, every instruction, every missed shot, she recorded it all, quietly building a picture no one else could see. A three-dimensional map of chaos and physics and possibility. As the sun began to fall and Alpha Team lined up for their final attempts, the impossible still loomed. The target mocked them. The wind danced, and none of them, not one, could find their mark. But Alyssa knew something they didn't, something she wasn't ready to share. Not yet. Because tomorrow she wouldn't just carry rifles. Tomorrow she'd carry the weight of every doubt, every insult, every sneer, and she would put it all on the line. And if her calculations were right, the impossible was about to become history. Why was she there before dawn, standing in the cold, long before anyone else would arrive? The air was sharp that morning, thin, dry, and clear enough that every distant ridgeline cut like a blade against the pale horizon. Silver Creek was still asleep, its range empty, its firing platform silent. And yet, Cadet Alyssa Trent was already there, packing the perimeter with deliberate calm. Today would not be like the others. Today she wasn't just observing, she was preparing. At 04:45, the crunch of boots on gravel broke the quiet. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached from the rear gate, followed by Master Sergeant Peterson. Neither man spoke at first. They didn't need to. The look they exchanged with Alyssa said it all. They were here for the same reason. "Morning, Cadet," Peterson said gruffly. "Morning, Master Sergeant. You ready to back up all those calculations?" "Yes, sir." Rodriguez glanced toward the empty platforms. "We've got 1 hour before the cadre shows. Make it count." It wasn't a formal order. It wasn't even authorized. But for the first time since arriving at Silver Creek, Alyssa was allowed to do the one thing they had told her she could not: shoot. The Macmillan TAC 338 felt like a memory in her hands, familiar weight, perfect balance. It settled against her shoulder like an old friend. Her breathing slowed without thought. Her pulse steadied. Years of muscle memory took over. "Target at 4550, Peterson said, settling behind the spotter scope. "Standard bullseye. Center mass is a hit." Alyssa nodded once, and just like that, the noise of the world fell away. She adjusted the scope in slow, methodical increments. 0 at 1000. Reconfirm at 2. Confirm drop rate at 3. Every tiny variable accounted for. The wind that had mocked every Marine yesterday now whispered secrets she could hear clearly. 15 minutes, Rodriguez warned. "Then we pack it up." Alyssa didn't respond. Her focus had narrowed to a single thread stretching across 4.5 kilometers of open air, a path only she could see. When she exhaled, her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle cracked. 10 seconds passed, long enough for doubt to creep in. Then Peterson's voice cut through the stillness. "Holy hell, impact. Edge of center mass, that's a hit." Rodriguez stared through his binoculars, shaking his head. "Confirm, it's a hit. Not dead center, but damn close." Permission to confirm 0 with a second shot, Alyssa said quietly. Make it count, Peterson replied. The second shot felt different, cleaner, more certain. She made a minute correction, barely a whisper of adjustment, but it was enough. Center mass, Peterson said, his voice flat with disbelief. Dead center. Rodriguez exhaled, a slow breath that sounded more like a laugh. Who the hell taught you to shoot like that? Time up, he hissed a moment later as headlights crested the ridge. They packed up the gear with practiced efficiency, erasing every trace of their presence. We were never here, Rodriguez reminded her. But they all knew the truth. Something extraordinary had just happened. The impossible had fallen. At 900, the range was alive with activity. The day's schedule, basic marksmanship fundamentals, was a thinly veiled insult. Major Blackwood was waiting with a group of first-week cadets. His eyes flicked briefly over Alyssa as she arrived. "Cadet Trent, you're right on time," he said, his tone deceptively polite. "Since you've been so eager to share your expertise, you'll be demonstrating proper technique for our new recruits." The setup was almost laughable. A standard-issue M4, targets at 300 meters, a distance most Marines could hit half asleep. It was designed to humiliate her, to prove that all her theory meant nothing on the firing line. "Yes, sir," she said evenly. "You have 5 minutes to demonstrate proper firing position, trigger discipline, and basic windage adjustment," Blackwood continued. "Then you'll fire a 5-round group." Walsh's smirk from the observation deck said everything. He was certain she would fail, or at least stumble. Alyssa didn't stumble. She moved through the demonstration with textbook precision, bone support, breath control, natural point of aim. The recruits watched silently, their earlier skepticism melting into fascination. When it came time to shoot, 5 shots cracked in rapid succession. When the target returned, the grouping was perfect, 5 holes clustered tight and centered. Blackwood's face was unreadable. "Acceptable," he said, though his tone betrayed something closer to shock. Walsh stepped forward. "Lucky conditions, barely any wind. Let's see how she handles real-world variables." At his signal, range assistants set up 3 battery-powered fans at staggered intervals, an artificial wind pattern designed to ruin even seasoned shooters' calculations. Alyssa studied the shifting dust and the rippling air for a moment. Then she fired again. The second grouping was even tighter than the first. Silence, the kind that made even the doubters hold their breath. "One final test," Blackwood said at last, "blindfolded." The recruits exchanged glances. Blindfolded shooting wasn't training. It was humiliation, a setup to make her fail publicly. "Problem, cadet?" Walsh asked. "No, staff sergeant." She blindfolded herself and took position. 3 shots, controlled, steady, deliberate. When the target was retrieved, the hits weren't perfect, but they were all center mass. Still a qualifying score. Still better than most of the recruits could do with their eyes open. "Class dismissed," Blackwood said quietly. But the real lesson had already been learned. The woman they mocked had just outshot them blindfolded. By evening, rumors swept the base like wildfire. Everyone was talking about Cadet Trent, the rookie who'd pulled off near-impossible groupings and read wind patterns with eerie precision. In the equipment shed, Rodriguez and Peterson were waiting. Peterson didn't bother with small talk. 2 fresh impacts on the 4550 target this morning, he said. "Dead center, that was you." Alyssa said nothing. "Cut the act," Rodriguez added. "We know it was you. What we don't know is how." "I analyzed the wind patterns," she replied simply. "They're complex but predictable once you understand the terrain." "Predictable," Peterson repeated with a short laugh. "That's like calling a hurricane predictable." Rodriguez's expression hardened. "Walsh is on the warpath. He knows someone hit that target and he suspects it was you. He can make your life hell on suspicion alone." What do you suggest, sir? Rodriguez exchanged a glance with Peterson. Tomorrow's the monthly long-range competition. Instructors and selected cadets. You're on the roster. I haven't been selected. You have now, Rodriguez said, handing her the paper. I added you as my staff choice. Walsh will fight it, let him. This isn't just about shooting, Peterson added. This is about proving that skill matters more than prejudice. Alyssa nodded, understood. That night, as she cleaned her rifle, Walsh appeared at her door without knocking. Impressive show today, he said, almost like you've had training beyond what's in your file. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That wasn't a compliment. He stepped closer, eyes cold. Drop out of tomorrow's competition. With respect, sir, I intend to earn my place through performance. Listen carefully, Walsh said, his voice low and dangerous. The competition is for those who have proven themselves. When you fail, and you will, it will prove what I already know. You're not ready. When he left, she exhaled slowly. The challenge was no longer about skill. It was about breaking her. Dawn broke over Silver Creek with a strange electricity in the air. The monthly long-range competition was no ordinary event. It was a crucible, a test of skill, endurance, and nerve that separated the truly elite from everyone else. Alyssa arrived at the assembly area with quiet focus. Walsh barely glanced at her. Major Blackwood read the briefing, outlining the 5 stages: known distance, unknown distance, moving targets, environmental challenges, and the infamous Stage 5, the Silver Creek Challenge. Its details remained classified until the final round. Walsh modified Stage 5 this morning, Rodriguez said quietly as they geared up. It won't be fair. I didn't come here expecting fair. The first 4 stages passed in a blur. Alyssa's performance was clinical, efficient, precise, relentless. By the time they reached the final round, she was leading the scoreboard. And that was when Walsh revealed his trap. You'll engage the 4550 target, he announced, after submerging your non-dominant arm in ice water for 30 seconds. You will keep it submerged while making your calculations. You may remove it for 3 seconds to fire, then back in for the next shot. The competitors stared at the pool of ice water. The test was brutal, designed to sabotage the body's ability to remain steady, to raise heart rate, to destroy the fine motor control necessary for extreme long-range shooting. One by one, they failed. Even seasoned instructors couldn't land a hit under the conditions. Walsh went next. His first shot missed. His second skimmed the target. His third clipped the outer edge, a hit but barely. Then it was Alyssa's turn. The cold bit into her flesh like teeth when she submerged her arm. Pain shot up her shoulder, spreading like fire. But instead of resisting it, she accepted it, controlled it. She had been taught long ago that pain was just another variable, one that could be understood and managed like wind or distance. Begin your calculations, Blackwood ordered. 30 seconds later, she was on the rifle. Her breathing remained steady. Her right hand was rock solid on the trigger. The first shot cracked. Impact, called the spotter. Outer ring, 2 o'clock. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A hit. Under those conditions, extraordinary. The second shot came cleaner. Impact, middle ring, center mass. Now the murmurs turned into a roar. She had matched Walsh, and she wasn't done. For the final shot, she paused, eyes closed for a heartbeat. She visualized the bullet's journey, the drop, the drift, the microcurrents. When she opened her eyes again, they were steel. The rifle thundered. Impact, the spotter's voice faltered. Bullseye, perfect center. The range erupted. Gasps, shouts, disbelief. Even Peterson muttered a stunned curse under his breath. Walsh's face, however, was carved from stone. Alyssa rose, pulling her numb arm from the water. No celebration, no smile, just calm professionalism, the kind that didn't need words. Most badass thing I've ever seen, Thompson whispered as she walked past. That night Silver Creek was different. Cadets who once mocked her now offered nods of respect. Instructors who ignored her spoke in hushed tones, and Walsh watched her with something new in his eyes. Not hate, not dismissal, something closer to fear. Because deep down, he understood what had happened. The impossible had been conquered, not by a legend, not by a man with decades of service, but by the woman he had dismissed as a beauty queen. And the real battle, the one that would decide her future, was only just beginning. Why were people who once ignored her now stepping aside when she walked past? Silver Creek had changed overnight. It wasn't just the way the cadets glanced at her now, no longer mocking, no longer dismissive, but with something sharper: curiosity, caution, respect, even fear. Word of what had happened during the competition had spread across the base before the sun had even set. The cadet who was supposed to carry rifles and clean optics had done what none of them could. She had hit the impossible target. And she had done it under conditions designed to break her. By the next morning, that fact hung over every conversation, every whispered hallway exchange, every sidelong glance. Alyssa noticed it, but she didn't feed it. She showed up early, as always. She performed her duties, as always. And when the daily briefing was called, she took her place at the back of the formation, as always. But nothing was the same. Today's training will focus on environmental reading and advanced ballistic calculations, Major Blackwood announced, his voice carrying over the formation. On the main screen behind him, the day's schedule scrolled past. For the first time since her arrival, Alyssa's name was not listed under equipment detail. Instead, it was paired with something new: Alpha Team Advanced Spotting Techniques. A quiet murmur spread through the group. Even the instructors exchanged quick looks. Alyssa stood a little straighter but said nothing. "Trent," Blackwood continued, his eyes briefly locking on hers, "you'll be joining Alpha Team today. Consider it an evaluation." The implication was clear. Her performance had forced their hand. She wasn't on the sidelines anymore. Alpha Team's advanced environmental course was conducted at the farthest edge of the range, where the infamous 4,550-meter target loomed on the horizon like a dare written into the earth itself. Today, however, they wouldn't be firing. Today was about the science that made such shots possible. "All right, listen up," Master Sergeant Peterson barked. "Today's challenge is simple. Develop a complete environmental picture from primary observation only. No weather instruments, no wind meters, no digital tools, just your eyes and your knowledge." The team spread out across the platform, binoculars and spotting scopes scanning the terrain. The morning air was cool, the sun still low enough to cast long, dancing shadows across the canyon. It was perfect, a living laboratory of wind, heat, and pressure. Alyssa took her place at Spotting Station 3. Through her scope, the landscape unfolded like a story she had read 1,000 times before. Heat shimmered in the valley. Tiny puffs of dust betrayed subtle crosswinds at lower altitudes. The distant grass leaned at an angle that contradicted the surface breeze. Layer upon layer, invisible but undeniable. Layer 1, ground wind, variable at 5 to 7 knots from west-northwest, Peterson announced, calling out his observations. Layer 2. Layer 3, crosswind from the northeast between 2,000 and 3,000 meters. Alyssa murmured quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Peterson glanced at her. "Say that again, Trent." She repeated the observation, adding details about the shifting thermal updraft near the canyon's midpoint and the subtle downdraft forming beyond 3,800 meters. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "Five-layer read?" he asked. "Yes, Master Sergeant." "That's ambitious." But when Alpha Team tested her observations with instruments an hour later, they matched almost perfectly. By midday, Alyssa's presence had shifted from unwelcome intrusion to indispensable asset. Cadets who had once mocked her now hovered nearby, eager to understand how she read the invisible. Even Peterson, a man not easily impressed, found himself relying on her assessments more than once. During a short break, she stood by the water station, replaying wind patterns in her mind. Thompson approached, leaning casually against the wall. "They're trying to break you," he said again, echoing his words from days earlier. "Is it working?" she asked, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Not even close. Walsh isn't used to cadets who don't fold. You're rewriting the script here." She said nothing, but they both knew it was true, and rewriting the script had consequences. By late afternoon, Alpha Team gathered for one last exercise, live fire attempts at the impossible target. The results were predictable, improved from earlier in the week, but still unsuccessful. Their shots were tighter, more consistent, but they still fell short. "Vertical wind stratum at 3,000 meters is pushing rightward drift," Alyssa murmured as she stacked ammunition beside Rodriguez. "What was that?" he asked. She hesitated. "Nothing, sir." "No, say it again." She repeated her analysis. Rodriguez studied her with renewed interest. "That's a complex read," he said. "Most people don't even see the layer changes without instrumentation." "I can see the mirage through the spotting glass," she explained. "The distortion patterns show 3 distinct layers." "Can you calculate adjustments from that?" "Yes, sir, roughly." Rodriguez nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "That's advanced." But before he could ask more, Major Blackwood appeared. "Trent," he called, "a word." He led her away from the group to the edge of the range. "Your performance today has created quite a stir," he said. "I have instructors coming to me asking how you're doing what you're doing." "I apologize if I've disrupted training, sir." "That's not my concern," Blackwood replied. "My concern is understanding exactly what's happening here." He paused, then gestured toward the distant target. "That 5-layer wind model of yours, it's not standard doctrine. It isn't taught in any sniper school I know of. And yet, it's working." Alyssa remained silent. "I made a few calls," Blackwood continued. "Reached out to some old contacts in Special Operations Command. Mentioned the name Trent." Her pulse slowed. "You know what happened?" he asked. She said nothing. "I got a call back from a general I haven't spoken to in 15 years, Blackwood said quietly. "He wouldn't confirm or deny anything, but he suggested I should pay very close attention to your development here." A heavy silence settled between them. Blackwood studied her for another long moment. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we have VIP visitors from headquarters, an inspection team. I want you front and center for the demonstration, and we'll be showcasing the impossible shot." It wasn't a request, it was a command. That night, Rodriguez visited her in the armory while she cleaned her assigned weapon. "Tomorrow's demonstration," he said, "is bigger than Blackwood let on." "Sir, the Commandant of the Marine Corps will be there." She paused. "I see. And Walsh is pushing for a head-to-head demonstration, you versus him, on the impossible shot." It was the confrontation everyone had been waiting for. The old guard versus the new, tradition versus evolution. The master versus the cadet. The next morning dawned bright and brittle. Additional security personnel lined the range. Black SUVs bearing flag rank insignia rolled into the parking lot. The atmosphere was electric, heavy with expectation and the kind of pressure that crushed lesser shooters. Walsh stepped to the firing line first. He was every inch the Marine sniper, calm, deliberate, controlled. His first shot struck the target's outer ring. His second landed in the middle ring. His third scattered just outside the bullseye. It was a demonstration of skill that few in the world could match. And then it was Alyssa's turn. She moved into position with deliberate slowness. Through her scope, the world narrowed to a tunnel of precision. Every layer of wind, every subtle temperature shift, every trace of barometric change, all of it mapped itself in her mind. Her first shot hit the center ring. Her second, bullseye. For her third, she paused slightly longer, sensing a shift in the highest wind layer. A small correction, a controlled breath. Impact, bullseye, perfect center. The observers erupted. Even the commandant, a man known for his stoic composure, nodded with genuine approval. Exceptional shooting, he said as he approached, especially for someone who's only been here 10 days. Yes, sir. You developed this multi-layer analysis yourself. I adapted existing principles to Silver Creek's environment, she replied. The commandant studied her for a long moment. Your name sounds familiar. Any relation to Master Gunnery Sergeant James Trent? The question hit like a thunderclap. Beside her, Walsh stiffened. He's my father, sir. I see, the commandant said, a knowing expression crossing his face. That explains a great deal. Your father was one of the finest snipers the Corps ever produced. His work with special reconnaissance set standards we still follow today. He gestured for the others to move on. I'd like a word with you in private. The conversation that followed changed everything. At ease, cadet, the commandant said once they were alone. Or should I say, Lieutenant Trent? The words landed like a rifle shot. Alyssa didn't react, but her heart hammered in her chest. Your cover is intact with most of them, the commandant continued. I'm simply acknowledging what I already know. Project Longshot. That's why you're really here, isn't it? Yes, sir. Advanced Capability Assessment under non-optimal conditions. Yes, sir. When the impossible shot started registering consistent hits, HQ wanted to know how. Your father's program is proving quite effective. He paced slowly, his gaze steady. Your demonstration today confirms it. Even under extreme stress conditions, the long-shot methodology works. It's time we bring parts of it into the open. When they returned to the group, the commandant's voice carried across the range. The techniques demonstrated here today, particularly Cadet Trent's environmental analysis, will form the foundation of our next-generation sniper program. Major Blackwood, I'm authorizing a special training cadre. Cadet Trent will serve as technical advisor. The words sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. Walsh's jaw tightened visibly. This wasn't just recognition, it was a revolution. That evening, Major Blackwood summoned her to his office. Walsh stood rigidly by his side. I received new paperwork after the commandant's visit, Blackwood said. Effective 3 weeks ago, you were designated as a technical liaison from the Advanced Capabilities Directorate, assigned here to evaluate our program. Walsh's eyes burned into her. So you were never really a cadet. My assignment was to observe without disrupting training, she said calmly. By pretending to be a rookie and letting us treat you like dirt, Walsh's voice dripped with fury. Was it amusing, Lieutenant, carrying rifles while knowing you could outshoot every man here? No, Staff Sergeant, it was my duty. Enough, Blackwood said. What's done is done. The question is how we move forward. Alyssa straightened. The classified portions of Longshot remain restricted, but I'm prepared to provide full briefings on the unclassified methodology. Unprecedented, Walsh muttered. Our entire doctrine being rewritten based on techniques we can't even see. Not rewritten, Alyssa corrected. Enhanced. The fundamentals remain the same. Longshot just pushes them further. Walsh said nothing, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had intensified. The battle for Silver Creek wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. And this time, it wasn't just about a shot. It was about the future of everything the Marine Corps thought it knew. Why did the base suddenly feel colder, even under the same unrelenting sun? The morning after the commandant's announcement, Silver Creek wasn't the same place. The air was heavier, quieter. Conversations that once happened openly now dissolved into whispers when Alyssa walked by. Cadets who had once mocked her now watched her with suspicion. and the instructors, especially Walsh, carried themselves differently. Not openly hostile, but cautious, calculating, as if every word might be measured against something bigger. She expected some resentment after the reveal, but she hadn't anticipated the isolation. It wasn't the cold shoulder that bothered her. It was the shift in tone. The mocking laughter and dismissive jokes had vanished. In their place was something more dangerous, the kind of silence that came before a storm. At the morning briefing, Major Blackwood's voice carried more tension than usual. "Effective immediately," he announced. "Project Longshot methodology will be integrated into Phase 4 of Silver Creek's sniper program. Lieutenant Trent will serve as technical advisor." A murmur rippled through the room. No one clapped, no one cheered. The words landed like a verdict. "Today," Blackwood continued, "we're restructuring team assignments. Alpha Team, you'll divide into 2 units, Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. Lieutenant Trent will oversee Alpha 2's training." Alyssa scanned the roster as it appeared on the screen. Thompson, Rodriguez, Peterson, 3 cadets she trusted and 1 she didn't, Staff Sergeant Walsh. The room was silent for a beat too long. Then Walsh let out a sharp laugh. "You're joking." "Not a joke," Blackwood said without looking up. "Effective today, you and Lieutenant Trent are co-instructors for Alpha 2. "With respect, sir, that's a mistake." "With respect, Staff Sergeant," Blackwood said sharply, "it's not your decision." Walsh's jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. The message was clear. Orders were orders. The first session was a disaster. "Lesson 1, Walsh barked, packing the line. "Real-world shooting isn't a math problem you solve on a chalkboard. It's a gut instinct. It's sweat and dirt and hours behind glass. You don't calculate a kill shot, you feel it." Alyssa stood at the far end of the line, watching him contradict everything she'd prepared. Her lesson plan, built around environmental modeling and data-driven shot solutions, lay forgotten on the table. When it was her turn, she stepped forward. "Lesson 1, she said, her tone deliberately calm, "is that instinct without understanding is luck, and luck runs out." The two approaches clashed like cold steel. Walsh favored muscle memory and combat-seasoned intuition. Alyssa pushed precision, calculation, and scientific discipline. Their students were caught in the middle, eyes darting between them, unsure which truth to trust. By midday, tempers were fraying. "You're confusing them," Walsh snapped as they broke for water. "I'm giving them the information they need," Alyssa replied evenly. "They don't need a physics lecture. They need to know how to pull a trigger under fire. And they will, but knowing why the shot lands is what keeps them alive. Combat isn't about why, it's about when." The argument drew stares from nearby cadets. Neither backed down. "Enough," Rodriguez said, stepping between them. "You're both right and you're both wrong." Walsh glared at him. "Whose side are you on?" "Neither, but if you keep fighting like this, you're going to ruin the team before it starts." The words stung because they were true. The days that followed were some of the hardest of Alyssa's career. The more she pushed her methods, the harder Walsh pushed back. He criticized her lectures, undermined her demonstrations, and challenged her authority in front of the cadets. It wasn't subtle, it was a campaign. Yet slowly, cracks began to form in his resistance. During a wind call exercise, one cadet misread the environment and missed his shot by nearly 2 meters. Alyssa walked him through the correction step by step. On his second attempt, the bullet hit dead center. Walsh said nothing, but he didn't interrupt the next time she spoke. During a field scenario, a simulated enemy sniper pinned down the team. Walsh's instinct-driven approach resulted in 2 failed flanking attempts. Alyssa proposed an alternate plan based on predicted wind shifts and visibility zones. The plan worked flawlessly. Again, Walsh said nothing, but his silence was heavier this time. By the end of the week, the cadets had stopped whispering about the science experiment. They were calling it the system, and they were using it successfully. Still, Walsh's hostility never faded completely, and it came to a boiling point on a Thursday afternoon during a live fire evaluation. The exercise was simple on paper: coordinated team fire at staggered distances under simulated combat conditions. In practice, it was chaos: shifting winds, multiple moving targets, and time pressure that punished hesitation. Alyssa's team used long-shot methodology to plan their shots. They coordinated wind reads, staggered their timings, and accounted for terrain interference. Walsh's team relied on instinct and experience. By the end of the drill, the results weren't even close. Alyssa's shooters outperformed Walsh's by nearly 30%. As the teams cleared the range, Walsh approached her. His voice was low but sharp. "You think this proves something?" "It proves the method works," she replied calmly. "It proves nothing," he spat. "These kids are fighting paper targets. You put them in real combat and they'll freeze when the situation doesn't match their equation. Or," she said evenly, "they'll adapt because they understand the variables." His jaw tightened. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" "No," she said quietly. "I think you're a good Marine. I think you're one of the best, but even the best can learn." The words landed harder than she expected. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. That night, Alyssa sat alone in the observation tower, watching the desert fade into twilight. The range stretched out before her, endless and empty, a silent witness to every shot fired and every lesson learned. It had been weeks since she'd arrived at Silver Creek, weeks of insults, skepticism, humiliation, and resistance. And yet something was shifting. The cadets who once mocked her now sought her advice. The instructors who dismissed her now quoted her methods. Even Walsh, as much as he fought it, was beginning to see. But something else was shifting too, something deeper, darker. She had received a classified message earlier that day, a coded communique from Project Longshot's command cell. It was brief and unsettling. "Field integration successful. Phase II authorized. Stand by for operational deployment directive." Operational deployment. The words echoed in her mind long after the sun dipped below the horizon. Project Longshot wasn't just about training. It was about something bigger, something coming. 2 days later, Major Blackwood summoned Alyssa and Walsh to his office. The mood was tense from the start. "HQ has issued new orders," he said. "Silver Creek will host a joint exercise with SOCOM next week. It's a full-spectrum simulation: recon, overwatch, and long-range interdiction. Alpha 2 will lead the overwatch element." "Understood," Alyssa said. "Your team's performance will directly inform whether Longshot is adopted corps-wide," Blackwood continued. "If you fail, the program dies here." "Then we won't fail," she replied. Blackwood's gaze shifted to Walsh. "And you, Staff Sergeant, you'll serve as her second-in-command." Walsh's jaw clenched. "With respect, sir." "With respect, Staff Sergeant," Blackwood cut him off. "You will follow orders. Dismissed." The week leading up to the joint exercise was a crucible. Alyssa and Walsh had no choice but to work together, and slowly, grudgingly, they did. Their approaches clashed less frequently. Their instructions began to complement each other, and in the quiet moments between drills, they even spoke without anger. One evening, as they cleaned their rifles side by side, Walsh broke the silence. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "A show-off, a glory hunter, someone here to make a name for herself." "And what do you see now?" He sighed. "Someone who cares about the mission more than herself, someone who's willing to take the hits to get it done." She looked at him, surprised. "Is that your way of saying thank you?" "Don't push it." They both laughed, a small, rare moment of levity. The day of the joint exercise arrived with cold winds and overcast skies. Alpha 2 moved into position before dawn, settling into a ridge overlooking a mock enemy base. Their mission: provide overwatch and precision support for a special operations unit infiltrating the facility below. The conditions were brutal, shifting wind layers, intermittent fog, fluctuating temperatures, the kind of environment that turned every shot into a gamble. But this time, Alyssa wasn't alone. Walsh's instinctive calls paired seamlessly with her data-driven calculations. His gut read the subtle shifts in the enemy's movement. Her equations predicted wind changes before they occurred. The two styles, once bitter enemies, now operated as one. At 0647, the first hostile target appeared. Alyssa's spotter called the range. Walsh read the wind. Alyssa dialed the correction. The shot was clean, silent, perfect. One by one, targets fell. The infiltration team advanced without detection, and when an unexpected counter-sniper emerged on a distant ridge, Alyssa's team neutralized him before he could fire a single round. The mission concluded flawlessly. When the SOCOM commander arrived at the observation post, he was blunt. "Best Overwatch performance we've seen in 5 years," he said. "Whoever designed this method, it's a game changer." Walsh said nothing, but for the first time he offered Alyssa his hand. "Hell of a shot, Lieutenant." "Hell of a team, Staff Sergeant." That night, as Silver Creek celebrated, Alyssa stood alone on the ridge where it had all begun. The stars stretched endlessly overhead, cold and indifferent. They had won this battle, but Phase II loomed, and she knew deep down that the real test hadn't even started. Because Project Longshot was no longer just an experiment. It was about to become a weapon. Why was the air different that morning, colder, sharper, as if the wind itself was carrying a warning? 2 weeks had passed since Alpha 2's flawless joint exercise, but the celebration had long since faded. Silver Creek had returned to its rhythm of drills and evaluations. On the surface, nothing seemed changed, but beneath that familiar routine, something was shifting. The signs were subtle at first: increased security at the perimeter, more encrypted transmissions through the comms network, black SUVs coming and going at odd hours, and then there was the sealed envelope on Alyssa's bunk one morning, stamped with a symbol she hadn't seen in years, a silver falcon clutching a lightning bolt. Phase II, Operation Crossline. Directive, LONGSHOT Field Deployment, Active Status. She read the words twice before they truly registered. Project Longshot was no longer a training experiment. It was going operational. The briefing was held in a secure subterranean conference room beneath Silver Creek, a place most cadets didn't even know existed. The walls were lined with classified maps and satellite imagery. The atmosphere was heavy, silent. The stakes had changed. Major Blackwood was there. So was Rodriguez. Walsh, too. But seated at the head of the table was someone Alyssa had never met before, Brigadier General Colton Reeves, a man whose name was whispered in every special operations circle but never spoken openly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you're here because you are part of something that will redefine how we project power in hostile environments. Operation Crossline is a covert interdiction mission authorized at the highest levels." A satellite image flickered onto the screen, a rugged mountain range marked by thin red lines and coded symbols. "This is the Dakmir Corridor," Reeves continued. "It's a narrow valley system on the border of an unstable region. Intelligence confirms a hostile paramilitary network operating out of 3 fortified compounds here." Rodriguez frowned. "Rules of engagement." "Strictly covert," Reeves said. "No direct assault. Our goal is to disrupt logistics, disable communications, and neutralize high-value targets with zero footprint. No bodies, no broadcasts." Walsh crossed his arms. "In our role." "Your Overwatch," Reeves replied. "Longshot's Overwatch element will provide precision interdiction for the infiltration teams. No room for error. One missed shot could compromise the mission and ignite a regional conflict." Alyssa's eyes stayed locked on the map. The distances were extreme, longer than anything they'd attempted outside of controlled conditions. The weather patterns alone would make the shots nearly impossible. And then there was the terrain, unpredictable, hostile, unforgiving. Timeline, she asked. 72 hours, Reeves answered. We deploy in 3. The room fell silent. The hours before deployment passed in a blur of preparation. Every rifle was stripped, cleaned, and reassembled. Every optic recalibrated. Alyssa spent hours poring over satellite data, mapping wind corridors and elevation changes across the Dakmir Range. She memorized every possible vantage point, every heat signature, every terrain anomaly. In the armory, Walsh joined her, checking his own gear. For once, there was no sarcasm, no hostility. "You ready for this?" he asked. "I don't think anyone's ever ready for something like this," she said quietly, "but I'm prepared." He nodded. "Good, because this isn't a competition anymore." "No," she agreed, "it's not." The insertion was silent. 2 MH-47 Chinooks lifted off under cover of night, their rotors slicing through the cold desert air. Alpha 2, now designated Ghost Overwatch, sat in the dim red light of the cargo bay, gear strapped tight, weapons secured. No one spoke. They all understood the weight of what they were walking into. As the mountains of Dakmir rose out of the darkness, Alyssa felt the shift deep in her chest. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't about proving herself anymore. Every calculation she made, every shot she took, lives depended on them now. At 2:17 hours, they touched down on a barren ridge 5 kilometers from the first objective. Ghost Overwatch moved quickly, setting up their observation post under the cover of rocky outcrops. The valley stretched out below them, a jagged labyrinth of ridges, caves, and hidden roads. Somewhere in that maze, 3 high-value targets were moving. "Wind at surface, 5 knots southwest," Rodriguez reported. "Upper layer at 2,000 meters, 9 knots west-northwest," Alyssa replied. "Thermals shifting by sunrise." "Copy, teams are moving," Walsh said, scanning the valley through his scope. "Let's bring them home." The first phase of Operation Crossline went smoothly. Ghost Overwatch provided covering fire as infiltration teams sabotaged relay stations and severed communications lines. Alyssa's calculations were precise. Her shots landed where they needed to, disabling vehicles, neutralizing sentries, guiding ground teams safely through kill zones. But the mission's second phase was where everything changed. At 5:32 hours, a priority alert crackled over the comms. "Target Alpha is on the move, convoy heading east. Sector 4B ETA at Safe House. 22 minutes. Alpha was the primary objective, a financier and logistics coordinator whose network funded dozens of insurgent operations. He could not be allowed to escape. "Convoy's moving fast," Walsh said, adjusting his scope. "I've got visual on the lead vehicle." "Distance?" Alyssa asked. 4,700 meters, too far for a clean interdiction. "Not if we intercept at the choke point," she said, eyes scanning the map. "They'll have to slow down at the bridge in Sector 4E that puts them at 4,500, within reach." "Assuming they don't change route," Rodriguez added. "They won't," she said. "It's the only road that can support the convoy's weight." Blackwood's voice came over the radio. "Longshot, this is command. You have 1 shot at Alpha, make it count." The minutes crawled by. The convoy moved like a snake through the valley, slow, deliberate, heavily guarded. Alyssa adjusted her scope over and over, compensating for shifting wind layers, temperature gradients, even the Earth's rotation. Every variable mattered now. Every one of them could mean success or catastrophic failure. "Range 4550, Walsh called. "Wind at mid-layer dropping to 6 knots. Mirage shows light cross-current." "Copy," Alyssa whispered, adjusting 1/10 mil left. Her breath slowed. Her heart rate dropped. The world narrowed to a single point, the lead vehicle of the convoy now crawling across the narrow bridge. 3 seconds from intercept, Rodriguez said. 2, 1. The rifle thundered. The round traveled for more than 10 seconds, an eternity in the life of a bullet. And when it struck, the lead vehicle's engine exploded into a cloud of smoke and twisted steel. Hit confirmed, Walsh shouted. Convoy halted. But the celebration was short-lived. Alpha is dismounting, Rodriguez yelled. Secondary vehicles deploying counter-sniper teams. Positions compromised, Blackwood's voice came through. Exfiltration window reduced to 12 minutes. Alyssa reloaded. We're not done yet. The firefight that followed was unlike anything they'd trained for. Enemy spotters flooded the ridge lines, scanning for Ghost Overwatch's position. Mortar rounds began to rain down dangerously close. Radio chatter spiked as ground teams scrambled to adjust. Contact West Ridge, Thompson shouted. Sniper 2,800 meters. I've got him, Walsh said, taking the shot. The enemy spotter fell. Second shooter northeast cliff, Rodriguez called. Range 3,400. Engaging, Alyssa said, dialing her scope. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and the distant figure collapsed. Convoy splitting, Walsh barked. Alpha's vehicle is revering. Not if I can help it, Alyssa said. Her third shot ripped through the rear axle of the fleeing truck, sending it skidding into a ditch. The vehicle was disabled. The target was trapped. Target Alpha contained, Rodriguez confirmed. Teams moving in. By the time exfiltration began, dawn was breaking over the Dakmir corridor. The mission had been a success, communications severed, enemy logistics crippled, and a high-value target in custody. Ghost Overwatch packed their gear and began their trek to the extraction zone, exhausted but alive. But the mission had taken its toll. Never seen anything like that, Walsh said quietly as they hiked back toward the LZ. That wasn't just skill, that was art. It wasn't me, Alyssa replied. It was the team. He shook his head. No, it was you. You made the impossible possible again. She didn't answer, because deep down she knew he was wrong. It wasn't over. Back at Silver Creek, the debrief was a mix of praise and unease. Operation Crossline was a resounding success, so much so that the Pentagon had already greenlit Phase III of Project Longshot. But the after-action reports contained troubling language, potential overreach, escalation risk, unintended strategic implications. Alyssa read the words in silence, and beneath the pride, something colder stirred. This was never supposed to be about creating a weapon. It was supposed to be about precision, about reducing risk, saving lives, bringing control to chaos. But the system she'd built was growing beyond her reach, and the people using it didn't always share her vision. That night, she sat alone under the desert stars, the weight of what she'd done pressing against her chest. She had taken the shot, she had stopped the convoy, she had saved lives. But she had also started something she might not be able to stop. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones you fight out there, they're the ones you fight inside. And for Alyssa Trent, that war was just beginning. Why did the silence feel louder than the gunfire had? The operation was over. The mission was a success. On paper, everything had gone perfectly. But as the helicopters thundered them back across the desert sky, Alyssa Trent felt none of the satisfaction she was supposed to. She had done everything right, every calculation precise, every shot true. The mission had saved lives, disrupted a network that fueled chaos, and captured one of the most dangerous men in the region. Yet as she stared out over the endless stretch of scorched sand, the memory that lingered was not the triumph, but the sound. Not the crack of the rifle, not the shouts over comms. The sound that wouldn't leave her mind was the dull, hollow thud of that convoy slamming to a stop, the split-second scream over intercepted comms, the chaos that followed. She told herself those men had chosen their path. She told herself every bullet fired had been necessary. But the truth, the one that gnawed quietly at the back of her mind, was simpler. She had killed them before they even knew she was there. And that truth was growing heavier with every mission. Silver Creek welcomed them back with praise, medals, and commendations. The long-shot program had proven itself beyond doubt. Overnight, it went from experimental initiative to strategic priority. Funding increased. Teams expanded. High-ranking officials visited the facility to shake hands and take photos with the future of precision warfare. Alyssa attended the ceremonies, smiled for the cameras, accepted the medals, but none of it felt real. The faces blurred. The speeches echoed and faded. In the weeks that followed, Project Longshot transformed. What had once been a tightly controlled experiment became a sprawling network. Training centers, field teams, doctrine manuals, even new weapons systems tailored to the methodology she had created. She should have been proud, but the more she watched it grow, the more uneasy she became. Because something was changing. The program wasn't just about precision anymore. It wasn't about saving lives or controlling chaos. It was about power, clean, quiet, unstoppable power. And power, she knew, had a way of slipping out of its creator's hands. The first sign came during a classified briefing 2 weeks later. Operation Thornville, General Reeves announced to a select group of long-shot personnel. High-priority strike in an urban environment. HVT is a network coordinator responsible for multiple attacks across 3 continents. A satellite image flashed on the screen, a dense city block, crowded with civilians, markets, narrow streets. Target resides on the 4th floor of this residential complex, Reeves continued. Objective, precision neutralization, no collateral. Alyssa frowned. Sir, the margin for error in that environment is well within long-shot capability, Reeves interrupted. We've run simulations. The shot is feasible. Feasible. The word rang in her ears like an accusation. Feasible wasn't the same as safe. And this wasn't a convoy in a remote valley. This was a man inside a building surrounded by families, children, ordinary people who had nothing to do with the war. What's the intelligence confidence? She pressed. 73%, Reeves replied. It's the best we'll get. 73. It wasn't enough. Not for her. Not when one miscalculation could shatter more than glass and concrete. Sir, with respect. With respect, Lieutenant, Reeves said firmly. You're not here to question the mission. You're here to execute it. The room fell silent. The night before deployment, Alyssa walked the perimeter of Silver Creek alone. The cold desert wind cut through her uniform, but she hardly felt it. Her mind was somewhere else, trapped between what she'd been trained to do and what she believed was right. This was the war within her now. Not bullets, not enemies. It was the slow erosion of certainty. The creeping doubt that maybe, just maybe, the thing she had built to save lives was starting to endanger them. She thought of her father, the man whose lessons had shaped her, whose words still echoed in her mind. A sniper's job isn't just to shoot. It's to know when not to. What would he say about this mission, about this program? Would he still be proud of her? She didn't know. Operation Thornville launched under moonless skies. The insertion was silent, surgical, and tense. Alyssa and Walsh set up their hide atop a rooftop 2 kilometers from the target building. The view through her scope was crystal clear, the 4th-floor apartment illuminated by faint streetlights and the soft glow of a television screen. Visual confirmed, Walsh whispered. Thermal shows 2 adult signatures inside. One matches the target profile. 2, Alyssa asked. Who's the second? Unknown. She adjusted her scope, fine-tuning the resolution. A man and a woman, no weapons visible. The man matched the biometric profile. The woman likely a civilian. Mission parameters, she asked over comms. Target Alpha remains priority, Command responded. Engage on authorization. Collateral risk, she pressed. Within acceptable limits. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Acceptable limits. The phrase felt like poison. Take the shot, Ghost Overwatch, Command ordered. Repeat, take the shot. She exhaled slowly, every muscle coiled, every instinct screaming. And then she hesitated. Target is not isolated, she said. Command repeats, take the shot. Secondary presence, likely non-combatant. Engage, Lieutenant, that's an order. Her heart pounded, her breath caught. The world narrowed to the crosshairs. One squeeze and the mission would be over. And one innocent woman might die. Lieutenant, you are seconds from losing the window. Walsh's voice cut through the tension. Trent, your call. She made it. Negative shot, she said into the radio. Mission abort, I repeat, mission abort. The silence that followed was deafening. The team exfiltrated without incident. The target vanished into the night, slipping through their grasp. And when they returned to base, Alyssa was escorted directly to a secure conference room. No debrief, no congratulations. General Reeves was waiting. Do you have any idea what you've done? He demanded. Yes, sir, she said quietly. I prevented a civilian casualty. You disobeyed a direct order. I followed my training, sir. I made a judgment call. Your judgment cost us a high-value target. That man will rebuild his network. People will die because of what you did. Or people would have died because of what I did, she countered. We had a 73% confidence rate, sir. That means there was a 27% chance we were wrong. 27% is not acceptable when innocent lives are on the line. Reeves stared at her, his jaw tight. You're relieved of operational duty, effective immediately. Understood. The fallout was swift and brutal. She was removed from active missions. Her access to Longshot's classified systems was restricted. Her name disappeared from future deployment rosters. Overnight, Alyssa Trent, the face of the program, became a liability. Walsh visited her 2 days later. He didn't knock. You did the right thing, he said simply. Command doesn't think so. Command doesn't have to live with the shot. She looked at him, searching his face for judgment, but there was none, just quiet understanding. They'll sideline you, he continued, keep you out of the loop, maybe even push you out of the program. Maybe, she said. So what are you going to do? She stared out the window, the desert stretching endlessly beyond the base. I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep building something I don't believe in. Weeks passed. Rumors swirled. Some said she was being reassigned. Others claimed she was under investigation. The truth was more complicated. She was being tested. Command wanted to see if she'd break, if the weight of irrelevance would crush her resolve. It didn't. Instead, she began to write. In the quiet hours of the night, she filled page after page with everything she'd learned, not just the mathematics of Longshot, but the ethics of it, the conditions under which the system should never be used, the questions every operator should ask before pulling a trigger, the lessons her father had taught her, written now as doctrine. Weeks later, those pages would become known as the Trent Principles, a set of operational ethics that would eventually redefine precision warfare. But for now, they were just words. Words written by a soldier who had chosen conscience over orders. One night, long after lights out, Walsh found her in the empty classroom where she had been writing. "You're not done, are you?" he asked. "No," she said, "not even close. You know they'll try to bury this." "Maybe, but the truth has a way of surfacing." He nodded slowly, then handed her a folder. "This came across my desk. Operation Ashfall. They're planning a strike next month. Civilian risk is even higher than Thornville." Her heart sank, and they're still greenlighting it. Unless someone stops them. She stared down at the file, maps, coordinates, intelligence briefings. It was everything she needed to know. "You can walk away," Walsh said softly. "No one would blame you." But Alyssa knew she couldn't. She had started this, and if she didn't stop it now, it would spiral beyond anything she could control. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And Alyssa Trent was about to act, even if it meant defying everything she had ever sworn to protect. Why did the base feel like enemy territory now? The walls of Silver Creek, once a sanctuary of purpose and discipline, now felt suffocating like steel bars closing in around her. The same corridors she had walked with pride now echoed with suspicion. Every glance felt like surveillance, every door a test, every silence a threat. Alyssa Trent was no longer the program's rising star. She was its problem. Since the Thornville incident, her access had been stripped, her clearance downgraded. She was confined mostly to administrative duties, meaningless busy work meant to keep her out of the way. But she knew better. This wasn't about punishment. It was about containment. They wanted her quiet, obedient, forgotten. They didn't know how impossible that was. The first step was information. Walsh's warning about Operation Ashfall still echoed in her mind. The mission was scheduled for 6 weeks out, targeting a suspected insurgent command node embedded deep within a civilian district. Collateral estimates were dangerously high, far higher than anything she'd ever seen sanctioned. "Acceptable risk," the brief reportedly said. "Strategic necessity." But Alyssa knew what that really meant. Collateral was a word that made civilian deaths easier to sign off on. Strategic necessity was what they called it when moral lines blurred beyond recognition. She couldn't stop Ashfall by pulling a trigger. This time, she'd have to fight a different kind of war. And that war started with the truth. She began with the documents Walsh had given her, heavily redacted mission briefs, partial satellite imagery, and a cryptic list of secondary objectives that raised more questions than they answered. It wasn't enough. If she wanted to expose what was happening, she needed the complete picture, and that meant breaking through the walls they had built around her. Late at night, when the base was silent, she started slipping into restricted sections of the database. Old habits, drilled into her by her father years ago, guided her fingers across the keyboard. Layer by layer, she bypassed security protocols and access locks until the classified files of Ashfall unfolded before her. What she found chilled her to the bone. It wasn't just one strike. It was a campaign, a series of long-shot-enabled missions designed to dismantle entire networks under the guise of precision. But the intelligence behind them was shaky. Some of the targets were little more than names pulled from intercepted messages. Others were confirmed to have no direct ties to insurgent operations at all. And yet, every single one was marked for elimination. Worse still, the collateral estimates weren't acceptable. They were catastrophic. Dozens, possibly hundreds of civilians could die if even one shot went wrong. And based on the intelligence gaps, the chances of that were higher than anyone would admit. This wasn't precision anymore. It was industrialized assassination. And Alyssa had helped build the machine. Walsh found her the next morning in the observation tower, staring out at the empty range as the desert wind whipped across the valley. "You've seen the files," he said. "Yes. And it's worse than I thought." He nodded grimly. "They're not stopping. Thornville spooked them, they're accelerating. Ashfall is the prototype for a new doctrine. They're planning to deploy longshot teams globally by next year." "Global deployment," she repeated, her voice hollow. 42 teams, 8 continents, permanent forward bases, the whole thing's already in motion. She turned away, gripping the railing to steady herself. "I can't let this happen." Walsh studied her carefully. "Then you'd better understand what that means. If you go against this, if you expose them, they won't just end your career. They'll erase you." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Then they'll have to try." The next weeks were a blur of quiet rebellion. Alyssa moved like a ghost through Silver Creek, unnoticed, unremarkable, but always watching. She gathered evidence piece by piece: satellite images, internal memos, after-action reports, casualty estimates. She copied encrypted communications between command staff and defense contractors, a proof that Longshot's expansion was as much about profit as it was about security. Every night, she compiled the data into a single encrypted dossier, a digital map of corruption and ambition disguised as defense. But information wasn't enough. To stop Ashfall, she needed allies. Rodriguez was the first to join her. He didn't hesitate when she showed him the evidence. "This isn't what we signed up for," he said quietly. "This isn't the core I know." Peterson followed, reluctantly at first. "You're asking me to betray my oath," he said. "I'm asking you to honor it," Alyssa replied. Even Thompson, who had once dismissed her as an outsider, stepped forward. "If we don't stop this," he said, "we'll spend the rest of our lives explaining why we didn't." And then there was Walsh. Of all of them, his loyalty was the hardest to win, but when he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "You're right," he said. "This program was supposed to save lives. Now it's turning into something else, something ugly." It wasn't a rebellion. Not yet. But it was a start, a handful of soldiers determined to stand against a tide that seemed unstoppable. They called themselves Echo, a whisper, not a roar, a promise that they would not go quietly. Their plan was simple in theory: expose Ashfall before it launched, leak the evidence to oversight committees, to journalists, to anyone with the power to stop it, force public scrutiny before the trigger was ever pulled. But simple didn't mean easy. Security around Project Longshot had tightened. Every file was now stored behind multiple air-gapped firewalls. Every communication was monitored. Even stepping into the command wing required biometric clearance and two-factor encryption. They would have one chance, a narrow window during the final mission briefing, to access the central archive and extract the proof they needed. One mistake, and they'd be court-martialed for treason. "Failure isn't an option," Alyssa said during their final planning session. "Neither is hesitation," Walsh added. The day of the briefing arrived under heavy clouds, the kind that promised a storm. Command staff, intelligence officers, and contractors filled the secure conference room. At the front, General Reeves stood over a massive digital map of the Ashfall target zone. "D-Day is 10 days out," he said. "This operation will change the balance of power in the region. Success here will validate global expansion." As Reeves spoke, Alyssa's heart hammered against her ribs. Rodriguez's team moved into position near the secure servers. Peterson prepared the data exfiltration protocols. Walsh monitored the comms for signs of detection. It was happening. Then a flicker of movement on the screen. Access granted. Data transfer initiated. The files began pouring into their encrypted drive, proof of falsified intelligence, inflated threat assessments, and ignored collateral warnings. 2 minutes, Rodriguez whispered. But in those 2 minutes, everything fell apart. "Unauthorized access detected," a voice barked over the intercom. Alarms blared. Security doors slammed shut. Guards poured into the hallway. "Abort," Peterson shouted. "They're onto us." "No," Alyssa said, fingers flying across the terminal. "We're not leaving without it." 30 seconds. The room shook as security forces breached the outer corridor. Walsh stepped into the doorway, rifle raised. "Go, Trent. I'll buy you time." "Walsh. Go." The last file uploaded as boots thundered closer. Alyssa yanked the drive free and slipped it into her vest. "We've got it," she said, breathless. "We're moving." They burst into the hallway, gunfire echoing behind them. Rodriguez went down, covering their flank. Peterson hauled him to his feet. Walsh fell back, laying down suppressive fire as they sprinted toward the maintenance tunnels. South exit sealed, Thompson shouted. Rooftop exfil, Alyssa yelled. They raced up the emergency stairwell as alarms wailed through the facility. By the time they reached the roof, rotor blades were already chopping the air above. A civilian contractor helicopter, bribed by Echo days earlier, hovered above the landing pad. Move, Walsh shouted, helping Peterson haul Rodriguez into the cargo hold. Thompson followed. Alyssa was last, turning one final time to see the base she had once believed in now crawling with armed guards and flashing red lights. And then they were gone, swallowed by the night sky. The next 48 hours were chaos. The Echo leak hit the global stage like a thunderclap. Classified documents flooded news networks, oversight committees, and international watchdogs. The revelations were damning. Falsified intel, inflated threat assessments, deliberate suppression of civilian risk reports. It wasn't just ashfall under scrutiny. The entire long-shot program was now under investigation. Protests erupted. Lawmakers demanded answers. Allies questioned their partnerships. And inside the Pentagon, careers began to crumble. But the cost was steep. Rodriguez was arrested. Peterson was declared AWOL. Thompson vanished. Walsh, no one had heard from him since the extraction. Some said he'd been captured. Others believed he was on the run. And Alyssa, she was the most wanted woman in the U.S. military. She hid in plain sight, moving between safe houses and sympathetic contacts. Every night she listened to the news, the hearings, the investigations, the public outcry. And every night she asked herself the same question. Had she done the right thing? The answer was never simple. The leak had stopped ashfall. It had forced accountability. It had exposed corruption at the highest levels. But it had also cost lives, careers, and trust. It had fractured the very institution she had sworn to serve. And yet deep down, she knew there was no other choice. Some battles are fought with rifles, others with truth, and truth, she had learned, was the deadliest weapon of all. Weeks later, as dawn broke over an empty desert road, Alyssa stood beside a rusted pickup truck, staring at the horizon. Somewhere out there, her name was on every watch list, her face on every wanted bulletin, but she felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time, she wasn't just a sniper or a soldier or a symbol. She was a voice, an echo that refused to be silenced. And the war she had started wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Why did the horizon feel different this time? Not like an ending, but like something waiting. The road ahead of her stretched endless and empty, a ribbon of dust and silence winding through the desert. It had been 79 days since she vanished from Silver Creek. 79 days since Echo detonated the truth like a charge beneath the foundations of the most secretive program in the U.S. military. And in those 79 days, the world had changed. The long-shot leaks had triggered congressional hearings, intelligence inquiries, and military tribunals. Generals were called to testify. Contractors faced indictments. Entire chains of command were dismantled. The program she had built, the one meant to save lives, had been stripped down, audited, and suspended indefinitely. Some called her a traitor, others called her a hero. But Alyssa Trent didn't care about the labels anymore. She cared about the silence, the lives that had not been lost because she spoke out, the civilians who had not been caught in the crosshairs, the shots that had not been fired. And yet the cost still haunted her. Rodriguez was in a military prison. Peterson had been dishonorably discharged. Thompson was presumed dead after a botched extraction. Walsh, the man who had once hated her, then stood beside her, was still missing. And Alyssa, she was a ghost, a name spoken in closed rooms and classified briefings, a cautionary tale whispered to young recruits, the sniper who turned her rifle on the system. But her story wasn't over, not yet. The knock came just after dawn, 3 soft raps on the steel door of the safe house. Alyssa's hand moved instinctively to the pistol on the table. Few people knew where she was. Even fewer would risk coming here. "Who is it?" she called. "An old friend," came a familiar voice. She opened the door. Walsh stood there, gaunt, bruised, older somehow, but alive. "You're hard to find," he said, stepping inside. "I learned from the best." They stared at each other in silence for a moment, two soldiers bound by a war that had never been theirs to fight. Then Walsh set a weathered folder on the table. "What's this?" she asked. "Intel and a chance." Inside the folder were classified documents, newer, fresher. Satellite images, encrypted comms, mission briefs. Operation Ashfall had been canceled, yes. Longshot had been suspended, yes. But something else had risen from its ashes. "Project Vanguard," she read aloud. "What is this?" Same people, new name, same mission. They're rebuilding, quietly, off the books. Her chest tightened. They never intended to stop. "They never do," Walsh said. "But this time they're hiding it deeper. Private contractors, black budgets, no oversight." She closed the folder slowly. "Then we finish what we started." Walsh shook his head. "It's not that simple. They're watching for you now. One mistake and you disappear, permanently." "Then I'll be careful." He sighed. "This isn't your burden to carry alone." "It's not about me anymore," she said quietly. "It never was." They spent weeks building a plan, not a mission of sabotage or violence, but something more dangerous: exposure. They tracked Vanguard's shell companies, traced its funding pipelines, identified its political backers. Bit by bit, the shape of the beast revealed itself. It wasn't just a weapons program now. It was an industry, private, deniable, unaccountable. And unlike Longshot, it wasn't bound by rules of engagement or military law. If it succeeded, it would be unstoppable. One night, as they pored over intel by the dim light of a desk lamp, Walsh spoke without looking up. "You ever regret it?" She paused. "Regret what?" "Pulling the trigger on the truth." She considered the question carefully. "Every day," she said finally, "and not once." He smiled faintly. "That's the difference between guilt and conviction." Their work eventually led them to Washington, the heart of the storm. It was there, in the shadow of power, that Alyssa made her boldest move yet. Using the network of contacts she had built during ECHO, she arranged a secret meeting with Senator Elaine Ward, chair of the Armed Services Oversight Committee, and one of the few lawmakers who had defended her actions. The meeting took place in a quiet corner of a D.C. parking garage, far from cameras and ears. "You're supposed to be in prison," Ward said dryly when she saw her. "Supposed to be," Alyssa replied. Ward opened the folder Walsh had assembled. Her expression shifted from skepticism to alarm as she read. "This is significant," she said. "If what you're showing me is true, Vanguard violates half a dozen federal statutes." "It's true," Alyssa said, "and it's just the beginning." Ward closed the folder slowly. "Do you have any idea what will happen if this gets out?" "Yes," Alyssa said, "and I also know what happens if it doesn't." The senator studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Leave this with me. I'll see that it reaches the right hands." "Thank you," Alyssa said. "Don't thank me yet," Ward replied. "This might destroy careers, maybe governments, and if they find out you're behind it." "They already hate me," Alyssa said with a small, weary smile. "They can't hate me twice." The weeks that followed were a storm. A second wave of hearings swept Washington. Leaks trickled into the press, anonymous at first, then louder, more damning. Project Vanguard was dragged into the light, its funding frozen, its operations suspended. For the second time, a program born from her creation was dismantled before it could grow teeth. But the backlash was fierce. Hawks in the Defense Department called her a traitor. Others demanded her extradition. Anonymous threats flooded the news. Even some of her old allies distanced themselves, afraid of the political fallout. And through it all, Alyssa remained hidden, watching, waiting, knowing this was bigger than her. It had always been bigger than her. Because this was never just about a rifle or a mission or a target. It was about what happens when technology outpaces morality, when acceptable risk becomes a license to kill, when silence becomes complicity. And she refused to be complicit. Months passed. Investigations concluded. Programs were shuttered. New oversight laws were drafted, some of them inspired directly by the Trent Principles, now required reading for every sniper candidate in the Marine Corps. Alyssa's name, once erased, returned in a different light, not as a criminal but as a whistleblower, a reformer, a reluctant symbol of accountability. And yet she remained in the shadows. Fame had never been the goal. Redemption had never been the prize. Her mission was simpler and far more difficult, to leave the world a little less dangerous than she found it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Walsh found her sitting on a bench overlooking the Potomac, the lights of the Capitol glowing faintly in the distance. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's never over," she replied. He sat beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "You know," he said finally, "you could come back, testify, clear your name. They'd take you back in a heartbeat." She shook her head. "I didn't do this to clear my name." "Then why?" She watched the lights flicker on one by one across the city, each one a reminder of the lives that continued, the families that slept safely, the children who would never hear the sound of a bullet because of choices made in silence. "Because someone had to," she said simply. The night was quiet, the air was cool, and for the first time in a long time Alyssa felt peace, not because she had won but because she had fought, not because she had been right but because she had tried. She had started as a cadet no one believed in, a soldier dismissed and mocked, a sniper told she would never belong. She had carried rifles for men who laughed at her and later carried truths that terrified them. She had hit impossible targets. She had walked away from glory. She had built something extraordinary and then burned it down to keep it from becoming a monster. And though the world would never fully understand, that was enough. Because the measure of a warrior isn't the battles they win, but the ones they choose to fight. And some battles, the ones worth fighting, are fought not with bullets but with conscience. Not with fury but with resolve. Not with noise but with silence. As the first stars broke through the darkening sky, Alyssa Trent rose from the bench. She slipped her worn silver dollar into her pocket, the same one her father had given her before his final deployment, and turned toward the city. Somewhere out there, wars were still being fought, decisions were still being made, and people were still trying to turn power into control. But she knew something now, something they could never take from her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, the world changes.